Time for another episode of Simon Says. I'm Scott Simon, and we hope you enjoyed our previous episodes about Nike, their earnings, and talking about Colin Kaepernick as well as Tiger Woods. And now it's time to turn our attention back to journalism. A couple of weeks ago, we spoke with Dale Forbes, the former news director at the Wisconsin Radio Network, who now is a news writer for Learfield Communications. And down the street from Dale in Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin, he had a competitor at the newspapers there, Jeff Richgels, who's the online editor for Capital Newspapers. And we're going to talk about online journalism. Is it the same as print journalism? Is it different? What is the position of online journalism? A little bit about fake news, but also we're going to take our first foray into personal journalism. Jeff has a blog that's very successful in his field, and we're going to let Jeff talk about that toward the end of the episode. But at this time, we bring Jeff Richgels in on our conversation on Simon Says. Jeff, thanks for joining me. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about your journalism background?
Well, I graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. That's the flagship one. You see the Badgers playing football or basketball. That's I'm an alumnus there. I grew up in Madison, went to high school here, lived here my whole life. So just love the city. Love the university, had great experience there. Went there intending to, actually, I was in the honors program and then I was going to major in politics and eventually go to law school. And I got sidetracked via my bowling career, the bowling writer for the Afternoon Daily in Madison. There's a two newspaper town then, the State Journal in the morning and the Capital Times in the afternoon. And the Cap Times, their bowling writer, columnist, retired. And their editor at the time, he's now editor emeritus, a huge Cubs fan. That's his one fault. He actually has a condo in Chicago and season tickets. That's how big a Cub fan he is. So it's nice to see them win a couple years ago. But anyway, he was a bowler, and I had known him, and I had written a little bit my freshman year of college in the Kegler Bowling News, which had expanded to Madison from its base in Milwaukee at that time. And I was just writing a little, news and notes from my local bowling center where Mark McDowell and I grew up, called Village Lanes in Monona, which is still there. And Dave Zwiefel was the editor then. He knew about that. He knew of my bowling. I was a kid, hotshot young guy at that time, and asked me if I wanted to try and write a story and submit it. And needless to say, I required a whole lot of hand-holding. I had no journalism background, but I picked it up pretty quick. Had some real old pros at the Capital Times, at the news side, at the sports side, actually, who, helped me and directed me and edited me very thoroughly, let's just say. And the next thing you know, I was being sent out to cover high school sports and that. And by my sophomore year, this December 1980, I was 18 years old and a freshman in college when I started in journalism. And the whole time I was at the UW, I was a part-timer, at sometimes full-time hours, though, depending what was going on, but a sports stringer and the bowling columnist. By the 81, my second year of college, my sophomore year, I switched my major over to journalism, and there went law school and all that. And other than the 2 years that I was on the Pro Bowlers Tour in 87 and 88, I worked pretty heavily as a part-time stringer and still did some work when I was home in those 2 years. And then had all the wrist surgeries, 3 of them I ended up having, the last 2 in 1989. And that put an end to my PBA Tour career, which wasn't very successful anyway. And so the next thing you know, by late 89, I realized, bowling's not going to be where I'm going to be my career. And so I was just taking anything I could, working as hard as I could on all the part-time stuff at the paper. And the next thing people would leave. And I applied for one job, didn't get it because it was mostly editing, and I didn't have any copy editing, which was a lot of computer programming at the time, complicated stuff on the old computers we had then. And so another guy who was a real paginator and editor, he got that. But then another person left on the news side, and that actually worked out better for me, and I became a news reporter in early 1990, and that allowed me to basically not have to work weekends, so I could bowl on weekends, and built a pretty successful career doing that, side career, I guess, and have been with the Capital Times from 1990 covering general assignment, cops and courts for 5 years, and county government, then about 10 years as a business reporter. And then the Cap Times, as happened in the late 2000s as the economy cratered and journalism cratered for a variety of reasons, the Cap Times ceased to be a daily publication, and it became a weekly with an online presence that was still tied to the State Journal, the Morning Daily, and the State Journal continued on as a morning paper. And after about a year or so with the Cap Times, they were expanding the online team, and I wanted to, I just saw that as something cool in the future, and I just decided I would go for that. And the next thing you know, in '09, I became one of the online editors at Capital Newspapers, and eventually, that all morphed into a separate department at Capital Newspapers, but we also became the digital center for Lee Enterprises, which is the owner of the State Journal and also the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and a variety of other papers. There's 40-some papers that are part of the Lee chain. And actually, I think we just merged with Warren Buffett's newspapers.
Wow.
In the last 6 months or so. So the Lee Buffett thing together now, boy, it might be over 60 newspapers. I'm not sure exactly how many of the Buffett papers were. That's a relatively new development, and that's way above my pay grade to worry about that. But basically, I spend about half of my day working on stuff that is Madison.com centric, which is the main websites of the Cap Times and State Journal, and then about half of my time syndicating and creating and moving content for the Lee chain. Everything from, syndicating across the thing, national news stories in the morning. I get in there I'm there by 4 a.m. every day and work till 1 or so. And so I'm kind of on my own. I like to joke that my responsibilities are far above my pay grade in my job description, because when I get in there, there is no one else around. There's no one else awake, and if there's something big going on, I have to make a news judgment on whether or not to send that out to 40-some papers and how to handle it, and picking pictures, picking which stories, writing headlines, all of that stuff. So. But I mean, I've been doing this for 38 years, and I got a pretty good handle on things. And you just follow the same rules of journalism that you always followed, and things. So far, no tragedies or disasters or whatever you would say. But when something like Hurricane Florence is going on, in the morning it was me, and I'd find the latest story and the newest news and get that out. So then when people would wake up, they would see a breaking alert at the top of the paper, and they would get their mobile notifications if they'd signed up to, here's the latest on whatever it is. And of course, today we're seeing, a pretty historical day in United States history. And so all of us at the paper today were working on a variety of things tied to the Supreme Court hearings. And needless to say, that's been a pretty interesting and busy day. But,
you're just like Morning Drive Radio, the first voice, just like Morning Drive Radio, first voice. So, and you mentioned that the foundation of journalism isn't different between online, print, even radio, television, but online is different from the print in that you're not constricted by the size of a paper.
Right.
But at the same time, as you said, you're the only one there having to blanket news that could involve many different stories. Do you think that in online journalism we get shorter versions than we do in the printed newspaper now?
I think you get mostly longer because,
really?
As you touched on it, electrons are free. Not really, but in the real newspaper, the print newspaper world, you're totally constricted by the size of your news hole, as we call it. Mm-hmm. And, in the old days, there would be, sometimes you'd have trouble filling all the hole if you had enough advertisements and that sort of thing. And like a Sunday paper, it'd take you 2 arms and a wheelbarrow to bring it up from the driveway. But these days, the print papers are pretty small, and the editors that work on the print side, their skill mostly is in chopping stories down and making sure they get the the best part of every story in there. Whereas if somebody files a 35-inch story and only 15 inches go in the paper, you're going to see the 35 inches online because there's no reason not to run all of it.
Right.
So, and if you're reading online, you're usually getting a whole lot more content because there's just no restrictions on. The only restriction is on how much man labor there is and woman labor there is to put it all out there for you.
And we're going to talk about a particular story that you wrote a few months ago in terms of length, but also its impact pertaining to your personal blog. But we want to keep with the standard journalism that you do online for Capital newspapers and the position it has in the market. Do you have any numbers as to the gains being made in online readership of news as against the decline of paid circulation from it? Is it a scale that your side online goes up and at the same time the printed side goes down?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's obviously happening. I don't know our latest print subscription numbers. I know at one time the State Journal was around 100,000, I believe, 90 to 100,000 on a daily basis, and perhaps 160 to maybe 175, 175,000 for the Sunday paper. But in those days, that Sunday paper, the circulation range was basically the entire state except southeast Wisconsin, which they ceded to the Journal Sentinel. Mm-hmm. The Journal and the Sentinel in those days, they were two separate
in Milwaukee,
papers.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't. The State Journal never went over really and competed with them. It went basically to about halfway between Madison and Milwaukee. But you could go up to northern Wisconsin, where my girlfriend's family has a cabin, and you could get the State Journal up there back in those days. And we don't spend, the kind of money it takes to circulate that widely anymore. It's just not sensible. But you can see, online we measure it. I've got a screen in front of my face 24/7 or whatever. Whenever I'm at work, I have a screen in front of my face, and I can see it on my laptop wherever I may be when I'm hooked up to our virtual private network. That tells me in real time how many people are in every story, ranking them. We got every stat from page views, whatever you can imagine. It's all, Google Analytics type based stuff that tells you anything you want to know. And you can track over time. I mean, we've had days where just Madison.com has had 1 million page views.
Wow.
We had a terrible flood here recently back in August that's still impacting the area, and that day we did 1 million page views. And I mean, that's only happened maybe 10 times in Madison.com history, but it happens more now than there's a better chance for it happening now than it ever could. I mean, I would imagine today, league-wide, we're going to be very, very huge today. Maybe perhaps even a record. I don't know. We'll know more about. I don't know exactly. I left work I stayed a little later today working on some stuff till about 3, and the numbers were not huge, but we hadn't put out any stories that nothing definitive had happened.
Right.
with the hearings with Kavanaugh. So, but we were putting out little tidbits and videos and photo galleries and that sort of stuff that was getting some traffic. But anyway, the real measurement that you see is revenue. And the last I had seen, the digital side is now approaching a third of revenue, the last I'd seen. And, when I first went over there, we weren't even 10%. And that's about 10 years, not quite 10 years ago. So it's just a matter of time. And eventually the digital side will be more than half. And it'll be long after I'm gone, but perhaps before I'm dead, long after I'm retired, I should say, okay. I would assume, but perhaps before I'm dead, you may not see print newspapers anymore. I don't know, because basically it's hard to find anybody under the age of 30 that reads a print newspaper, or so we say. And they're just used to getting everything on their phone or their tablet, and that's what it is, and they don't mind paying for a subscription to things that they really value.
Let me ask you, do you print every day? Because last year when I was working out of Baton Rouge, Times-Picayune down there, they don't publish every day. I think they only publish 4 days a week, maybe only 3 days a week. Do you publish every day?
Yep, the State Journal does. Yeah, it's a daily newspaper. That's not going to go away. I mean, we're the paper of record for Wisconsin. I mean, all the laws get published in our paper according to that's a state law. Someday they're going to quit doing that, but I hope it's nice revenue for us, so we don't want them to. But I mean, it's kind of silly to require that. But there's some people that aren't online, so that's why it's still around. And there's still enough business for us. But I mean, you've seen, I think Detroit is the biggest city that saw their paper go to where they're only like 3 days a week, if I'm not mistaken. And you know, if you're not selling many ads and you're in a city that, you know, Madison is different because we're a state government town and a university town, so there's lots of highly educated, well-read people here who still want to get a newspaper every day and want to follow the news. And no offense to places like New Orleans or Detroit or whatever, but they may not necessarily have, you know, a world-class university, and they're not the seats of state government, so you just don't have quite what we have here. And I don't see our paper going, the State Journal, going to less than daily for a long time. Like I said, I'm sure that, you know, I'm 9 years from being 65, and, you know, that's when you can get Medicare, so that's when I would retire.
That's when you'll be calling me at the office, United Healthcare, saying, "Can I take care of your Medicare needs, sir?"
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's you know, if it wasn't for the cost of healthcare before Medicare, I could retire. Susie and I could retire quite a bit earlier, but when you look at what healthcare costs, and I enjoy what I'm doing, so
great.
I'll be working at the paper if they want me until I'm 65, I'm pretty sure. So that's 9 years away. And I still think we'll have print then, and probably print on a daily basis, partly because it's Madison and partly because I just don't think, I mean, I would say it might be 25 years, and then the people who are 30 now will be 55 then, and there'll be hardly anyone left that is their world was newspapers, because anybody 30, really their whole world has been online since they were teenagers. So, you know, they're that's what they've grown up with, and that's once they're the, you know, 55 and or so, and everybody younger than them will be that way. Then I think you'll just see, just by force of habit, that there just won't be enough people buying newspapers anymore for them to be there. I mean, I am certainly no sociological expert or anything, but that's just what I see. I have a lot of friends from bowling and stuff that are under 30, and I don't know many of them that read a print newspaper.
A quick break. We're visiting with Jeff Richgels of Capital Newspapers in Madison, Wisconsin, but now a word from our sponsor, doTERRA Essential Oils. Your wellness consultants are Jay and Kathy Kirsting. I have personal experience myself with doTERRA Essential Oils. Last year I was stricken with a heart attack, ended up in a hospital for a month and a half. And when I came out of a coma, I was groggy, I wasn't alert, and Jay Kirsting brought by a vial of wild orange essential oil from doTERRA. And day by day, I could see that I was becoming more alert. And it really did work. And it worked for Jay. That's how he got to be a doTERRA Essential Oils consultant. Here's his story about what doTERRA Essential Oils did for him.
I got involved because I was having a real issue, and this may surprise some. I've spent a number of years in broadcasting, and I was under so much stress that I was unable to speak almost nonstop. That was me. I couldn't get a thought out. My wife reached out to a friend of ours and said, "Stephanie, maybe you've got something, let's try it." She presented us with this essential oil called Balance. And all this one I did was I rubbed it on my hands and I inhaled it. So I would just put my hands over my nose and I would inhale it. And within a couple of days, I was back to speaking normally again.
So we're coming up on the holiday season. If you're looking for a great gift idea for someone, contact Jay and Kathy Kirsting for doTERRA Essential Oils. You can go to their website, jkirsting.com, and there's a link there to their doTERRA products. There's many of them to choose from. Take your time and get something for yourself. After all, if you're happy, everyone else is happy. Scott Simon of Simon Says with you. Jeff Richgels joins us for this episode. We're talking about online journalism. He's the online editor for Capital Newspapers in Madison, Wisconsin, for Lee Enterprises, a chain of newspapers in the Midwest. When we talked about the flood before the break, do you see that online journalism is really doing something for newspapers it wasn't able to do before when it was just a print product? And that is, you can really get involved in breaking news and continue updating that story every 15 minutes, every half hour, every hour.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what we were doing. I mean, that rainstorm started on a Monday night. I don't have a calendar in front of me. It was like August 20th. And, when I went to bed, it had rained heavily, but I get up at 3 a.m., so I went to bed at 7 or 7:30, I think. And when I woke up at 3 a.m. and I looked at, I looked at my phone and saw the tweets and the breaking news that we'd sent out, I went, whoa. And I follow several of the other media entities here, obviously, just as, I have to know what's going on. And I immediately said, this is big. I mean, this is really big. Mm-hmm. And, at first I was kind of uncertain if I'd even be able to get into the office. And so that first morning, I didn't even go to work right away in the morning. I immediately turned on my laptop at home and sat down and got working because I didn't want to spend the 10 minutes to get dressed and the 15 minutes to drive into work. I wanted to get directly into work, onto work, and fired up my laptop. And the next thing you know, I was off and running, and I sat here and I updated our main flooding story myself before anyone else, because I started at probably 3:15 and I didn't have anybody in there until 7 to help me. And I basically, a couple people actually, because I left some messages for the bosses and they got people work. So there might have been people a little after 6, but for a few hours, I was all by myself, and news releases were coming in from the authorities like every 15. I'd get a story updated, and I'd hit save and re-up it to web ready status, so the changes would go online, and then there would be another news release and another news release, and so I was like running around like a chicken with my head cut off, and I probably had that story updated an uncountable number of times that first day, and this went on for day after day, because this flood, it was one of the most destructive things that's ever hit south central Wisconsin, and it's still impacting this area quite a bit. The rivers and lakes are still high, and there's huge hundreds of millions in damage, and it's been quite a story. And so we're still writing flood stories now and then. But at the first couple of days, we were doing updates almost continuously, and my job then was we created a collection asset with all the stories and the photo galleries and the videos, all in one asset that we kept at the top of our Madison.com site, pinned for a week and a half, I think I want to say. And our readers knew that if they came in and they went to that, they could get the latest news on the flood. Yeah. And I, without a doubt, because no offense to the TV stations here or anything, but they just don't have the staff, even as a reduced staff we have at the newspaper these days compared to what it once was. We still have, we had 8 reporters and a couple of editors working on that story pretty much continuously for a week. People were doing nothing but that. And TV is not going to keep up with that. Sure, they've got prettier pictures and on-scene stuff and that, but when it comes down to the hard news of what roads are closed and getting stories with the people that were impacted by it on the scene and that sort of thing, and we ran back some of our old stories about that, ironically, that had predicted this sort of cataclysm because of climate change with some of the UW experts just a month earlier on a series of on our lakes here. So we just had stuff that something happened that has never before happened. We got a couple of emails that people just took the time to write emails to our online email box thanking us for the coverage. That's and great. How they kept them so informed. And people, you hear all the time, if you do something bad, that's the nature of the world. And it's not just newspapers. If you do your job and do it right, someone's going to rarely go out of their way to take the time to, write a note to let you know that's what they're paying for. Mm-hmm. But we did such a great job that a couple people actually went out of their way to send us emails thanking us for keeping them informed and complimenting us on the job we did, which, that's neat. That's the kind of reason that you don't get into journalism for the pay. Right. That's the kind of thing that there are many other jobs that you can have where you can really feel like you did something important. And journalism is one where you can do something important every single day.
And sometimes you read that and it does give you goosebumps. And in the future, Jeff, on a future episode, I want to talk to you about convergent journalism, because you talked about your competition with television stations, but newspapers online are converging video and even audio into stories. I want to talk about that down the road, but I do want to ask you this. When you hear the term fake news, what goes through your head as an online editor?
I don't know. I just chuckle at it. I'm not really sure what someone means by that. When I think of fake news, I think of the garbage on Facebook that any educated person quite clearly knows isn't right, and yet more gullible people, I guess, is the best way to put it, will share it and say, oh, look at this, and that sort of thing. And a lot of it was stuff that was done during the last presidential campaign, and it astounds me. I guess P.T. Barnum perhaps had it right, and maybe this just proves every time you go on Facebook and you see people sharing things that are just so obviously ridiculous or obviously photoshopped or obviously not possible, and yet they're sharing them and believing them, and it's like
yeah, I know.
I'm trying to find a nice way to say some of this, but it's kind of depressing in a way. But that's the kind of thing, that I when I say fake news, to me, I'm thinking of something that's obviously patently false, and I know that that's not what necessarily it might mean to some people, but that's the way I think of it.
Well, Dale, when I had him on the air a couple of weeks ago, I think we narrowed it down for folks, and that's if there's fake news, that means somebody has to intentionally say to themselves, I have the facts that makes this story true, and I'm going to intentionally not include those facts or use those facts and present a story that I know is 180 degrees from the facts. Somebody actually has to say, I'm intentionally going to publish fake news. You've been in the business as long as I have, since the late 70s, early 80s. In my career, I've never, ever met anyone who said, I'm going to intentionally, change a story, because there's no secrets in newsrooms. I mean, if somebody were to do that, they wouldn't last a week.
Well, yeah, if someone did that, I mean, we have the long ethical policy that we have to attest to when we're hired, and I mean, you'd be fired tomorrow if you intentionally. That's not to say that we don't make mistakes.
Right.
That isn't to say that we don't sometimes get names spelled wrong and a fact wrong, a date wrong, might accidentally get something wrong, where we just, sometimes we're human, we make mistakes.
Right.
But intentionally writing something that in your mind is false will never happen, or if it does happen, you'll be fired as soon as the bosses find it out.
I hope you enjoyed this episode with Jeff Richgels of Capital Newspapers in Madison, Wisconsin. We'll hear more from Jeff later this week when we talk to him during bonus content about his personal online blog, where journalism is applied, a different type of journalism, and I think you'll enjoy that subject matter as well. If you would, please go to my website, simonsaystories.com, and comment on what you heard. If you've not subscribed, do so. Not just at my website, but at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and soon coming to Spotify. I'm Scott Simon of Simon Says, saying so long from the greatest city in the world, Las Vegas, Nevada.